Nikolay Stepanovich Gumilyov, April 15 and 1886, August 25, 1921, was an influential Russian poet, literary critic, traveler, and military officer. He was the co-founder of the Acmeist movement. Nikolay Gumilev was arrested and executed by the Cheka, the secret Soviet police force, in 1921. Early life and poems. Nikolay was born in the town of Kronstadt on Kotlin Island, into the family of Stepan Yakovlevich Gumilyov, a naval physician, and Anna Ivanovna Lvova. His childhood nickname was Montegomo, the Hawk's Claw. He studied at the gymnasium of Zarsko Selo, where the symbolist poet Innokenty Anensky was his teacher. Later, Gumilyov admitted that it was Anensky's influence that turned his mind to writing poetry. His first publication were verses "I Ran from Cities into the Forest" on September 8, 1902. In 1905 he published his first book of lyrics entitled The Way of Conquest to Doors. It comprised poems on most exotic subjects imaginable, from Lake Chad giraffes to Caracal's crocodiles. Although Gumilyov was proud of the book, most critics found his technique sloppy. Later he would refer to the collection as apprentice's work. From 1907 and on, Nikolay Gumilyov traveled extensively in Europe, notably in Italy and France. In 1908 his new collection Romantic Flowers appeared. While in Paris, he published the literary magazine Sirius, but only 3 issues were produced. On returning to Russia, he edited and contributed to the artistic periodical Apollon. At that period, he fell in love with a non-existent woman, Cherubina de Gabriac. It turned out that Cherubina de Gabriac was the literary pseudonym for 2 people, a disabled schoolteacher and Maximilian Voloshin, and on November 22, 1909 he had a duel with Voloshin over the affair. Gumilev married Anna Akhmatova in April 25, 1910. He dedicated some of his poems to her. On September 18, 1912, the child Lev was born. He would eventually become an influential and controversial historian. Traveled to Africa, like Flaubert and Rimbaud before him, but inspired by exploits of Alexander Bulatovich and Nikolai Leontiev. Gumilyov was fascinated with Africa and traveled there almost each year. He explored, helping development of Ethiopia, sometime hunted lions, and brought to the St. Petersburg Museum of Anthropology and Ethnography a large collection of African artifacts. His landmark collection, The Tent, collected the best of his poems on African themes, one of them, Giraffe, Guild of Poets. In 1910, Gumilyov fell under the spell of the symbolist poet and philosopher Vyacheslav Ivanov and absorbed his views on poetry at the evenings held by Ivanov in his celebrated turreted house. His wife, Akhmatova, accompanied him to Ivanov's parties as well. Dissatisfied with the vague mysticism of Russian symbolism, then prevalent in the Russian poetry, Gumilyov and Sergei Gorodetsky established the so-called Guild of Poets, which was modeled after medieval guilds of Western Europe. They advocated a view that poetry needs craftsmanship just like architecture needs it. Writing a good poem they compared to building a cathedral. To illustrate their ideals, Gumilev published 2 collections, The Pearls in 1910 and The Alien Sky in 1912. It was Osip Mandelstam, however, who produced the movement's most distinctive and durable monument, the collection of poems entitled Stone. According to the principles of Acmeism, every person, irrespective of his talent, may learn to produce high-quality poems if only he follows the guild's master's eye. Gumilyov and Gorodetsky. Their own model was Tesofol Gautier, and they borrowed much of the basic tenets from the French Parnasse. Such a program, combined with colorful and exotic subject matter of Gumilev's poems, attracted to the guild a large number of adolescents. Several major poets, notably Georgy Ivanov and Vladimir Nabokov, passed the school of Gumilev, albeit informally. War experience. When World War I started, Gumilyov hastened to Russia and enthusiastically joined a corps of elite cavalry. He fought in battles in East Prussia and Macedonia. For his bravery he was invested with 2 St. George Crosses. His war poems were assembled in the collection The Quiver. In 1916 he wrote a verse play, Gondola, which was published the following year. Set in 9th century Iceland, torn between its native paganism and Irish Christianity, it is also clearly autobiographical, Gumilev putting much of himself into the hero Gondola and basing Gondola's wild bridal on Gumilev's wife Akhmatova. The play was performed in Rostov-na-Donu in 1920 and, even after the author's execution by the Cheka in Petrograd in January 1922, the play, despite its crowd scenes being enacted on a tiny stage, was a major success. Yet when the Petrograd audience called for the author, who was now officially an executed counter-revolutionary traitor, the play was removed from the repertoire and the theatre disbanded. Quote, during the Russian Revolution, Gumilyov served in the Russian Expedition Corps in Paris. Despite advice to the contrary, he rapidly returned to Petrograd. There he published several new collections, Tabernacle and Bonfire, and finally divorced Akhmatova, whom he had left for another woman several years prior. The following year he married Anna Nikolaevna Engelhardt, a noblewoman and daughter of a well-known historian. Later poems and death. Despite the hard experiences of real travels and battles, he remained, to the end of his life, a schoolboy entranced by the Iliad of childhood, the adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. He never outgrew the influence of Mayne Reid, Alexandre Dumas, Père, Jules Verne, Gustave Aimard and others. Quote, in 1920 Gumilyov co-founded the All-Russia Union of Writers. Gumilev made no secret of his anti-communist views. He also crossed himself in public and didn't care to hide his contempt for half-literate Bolsheviks. On August 3, 1921 he was arrested by the Cheka on allegation of participation in monarchist conspiracy known as the Petrograd Military Organization, or Taganzyev conspiracy. On August 24, the Petrograd Cheka decreed execution of all 61 participants of the case, including Nikolay Gumilyov. They were shot on August 25 in the Kovalevsky forest. The case was officially declared as completely fabricated and all victims rehabilitated by Russian authorities only in 1992. Maxim Gorky, his friend and fellow writer, hurried to Moscow, obtained an order to release Gumilyov from Lenin personally. But upon his return to Petrograd he found out that Gumilyov had already been shot. Hayward, in an introduction to a book of Akhmatova's poetry, writes that the execution placed a stigma on Anna and her son with Nikolay. Lev's arrest in the purges and terrors of the 1930s were based on his being his father's son. Although banned in the Soviet times, Gumilev was loved for his adolescent longing for travel and giraffes and hippos, for his dreams of a 15-year-old captain, and was a favorite poet among geologists, archaeologists and paleontologists. His The Tram That Lost Its Way is considered one of the greatest poems of the 20th century. Culture influenced the Russian progressive rock band Little Tragedies used the poetry of Gumilyov in many of the songs, and had 4 albums which were entirely based on Gumilev's poetry. Russian people at Abyssinia, Alexander Bulatovich, Leonid Artemanov, Nikolay Leontiev,